the reasons I really like talking about emoji as gesture is because it helps us expand our notion of what we think of as important for communication, because we often get very hung up on speech and writing and think that everything needs to fit in a dichotomy between the two and associate a bunch of characteristics with speech or with writing that aren't actually intrinsic to the properties of those particular forms and of those particular media. So emoji are written. They are literally written. There is not a, they don't have speech-like qualities because they are not acoustic. If you are deaf, you can interpret them. They are literally not speech in as literal a way as that such a thing is possible, right? And yet what people are doing when they're saying that they're like speech is they're taking on additional associations that we have with speech that don't actually have to do with the acoustic mechanism of the speech stream, and saying that we associate with speech, for example, sometimes informality. And so they're saying that emoji are informal. Being informal is an orthogonal property to speech. It is not intrinsic to speech. You can have formal speech. I don't go home and talk to my dog like this. You can have, people who are on the radio are doing a much more formal genre of speech, prepared speeches, actors doing speeches. This is a formal genre that doesn't have a lot to do with the informal kinds of speech that you do with a dog or a child or your friends at the pub or something like this. And so I think that emoji are interesting precisely because they're such a written phenomenon, because we don't carry around, little flip books with 1,000 Unicode images that I flip between and like, oh, now I'm going to show you the heart eyes one. That would be trying to bring emoji into the spoken domain. It'd be, I'm trying to show you this emoji as I'm doing it, or I'm gonna hold up my phone and show you this emoji that is what I'm trying to convey. We generally don't do that when we're trying to convey the things that emoji convey in the spoken domain. We resort to acting them out. We use the gestures. If I'm conveying the heart eyes to you, I don't try to pull that up as an image. I'm going to draw those eyes on my face. So I think that, but what it does do, what emoji does do is illuminates the importance of some of the things that we sometimes neglect when it comes to speech. So we don't always talk about gesture alongside of speech as much as we could. We don't always talk about the importance of the gestural side because we take it for granted, because as humans, we've been doing gesture for thousands and thousands of years. And so sometimes it takes a new technology like emoji to help us appreciate something that's very, very old. The much more common use of gesture and the much more common use of emoji is these more, the faces and the hand emoji, and the sequences that they're used in are often just repetition. So you have a whole bunch of thumbs up, or a whole bunch of face with tears of joy, or you have what's very nearly repetition. So you have things like thumbs up plus okay, which mean the same thing in that context. So that's pretty close to repetition. Or you have face with tears of joy and loudly sobbing face, and those mean very similar things in that context. Like this person is having this big emotional reaction to something. So this doesn't look like the kind of repetition that you get with words, because word level repetition is pretty rare. You can get it sometimes. You can say things like very, 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 or so, or big, 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 but it's pretty rare. And you don't often get things with words, like you can have multiple adjectives like big bad wolf, but you don't often get big bad wolf, or big bad big wolf. And yet this is something you are completely free to do with emoji. You can use multiple hearts in different colors, and you can have, red heart, blue heart, red heart, blue heart. And this is something that's totally reasonable to do with emoji. So looking for where do we have this sort of more straightforward repetition, or this back and forth type of repetition? This is something that shows up in gestures rather than words. And so, one of the things you can do with gestures, as I'm doing right now, is you can repeat a gesture, the same gesture, over and over to emphasize a point. And it follows the rhythm of the words that you're saying it with. And this is called a beat. And so when you see people doing long strings of emoji, one of the reasons they might be doing this, especially for things like repeating the clapping hand emoji, where you do often clap multiple times, is that they're reflecting this sort of repetition that you see in the gestural domain. So there's lots of reasons that I think that it helps us reason more coherently about emoji to think about them in terms of gesture. Dressner and Herring have this great example from someone who posted on a message board, "I'm sick and tired all the time, smiley face." And if you think that emoticons are cues to emotion, this seems weird because surely this person is not happy about being sick and tired all the time. Nobody thinks this. And so what Dressner and Herring point out is that what we need to do instead is interpret emoticons, and by extension emoji, as cues towards the intent of the speaker. And we do lots of deliberate things to convey our intentions more clearly. And so in this case, saying "I'm sick and tired all the time, smiley face," doesn't mean I'm happy about being sick and tired. It means I'm trying not to look like I'm complaining. Or it means I'm requesting empathy, or I'm softening this complaint, or I'm doing all of these sorts of very pro-social things. It's not that people are producing this fake stuff and we read it as fake. We read it as a genuine intention on the part of the other person to make their intentions legible to us. So I think that if we look at emoji as this sort of only emotional thing, we actually miss a lot about what emoji are actually doing, because we start trying to see them through the lens of specific emotions like happiness, when in a lot of cases we're doing something that's much more subtle and social. One of the things that I think is really interesting about the internet as a place where we communicate with each other is that we're all doing a lot more writing, especially informal writing, than we were 50 years ago. 50 years ago, you could leave school, and if you didn't become a writer or a journalist or an academic, you didn't necessarily do any writing longer than a grocery list for the rest of your life. Maybe a postcard, but there was a period when you could call people and you didn't have to write anything. You might keep a diary, you might send letters, but you didn't have to. And now there's this period when you can barely organize a birthday party without writing to someone, because you've got to text someone and say, "Did you get the cake?" So we're doing a lot more writing in general. And I think what's essential is that we need ways of communicating our intentions and making our intentions legible to each other. We need ways of communicating whether we're serious or whether we're joking, or whether something made us laugh or something is sarcastic, of doing these sorts of additional levels of communication. But that doesn't have to be emoji. There are a lot of ways of communicating those intentions. You can use old school emoticons, you can use creative punctuation, you can use sort of creative respellings of words to make them match your speech more closely. You can use inventive vocabulary, you can use acronyms. There are lots of ways of doing that, and emoji are just one piece of that puzzle. But I think that having unlocked this increased ability to be expressive in writing, I don't think we're going to stop being expressive, even though the specific tools that we're using to do so may very well change.